Recommendations for the FY 2023 operating and capital budget. This workshop is open to the public. However, no public testimony will be taken. This workshop is being broadcast live on AACPS TV and on AACPS YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. I think at this juncture, we can turn it over to Dr. Arlotto and the staff, and then we will have questions following.
Outstanding. Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. As always, we're delighted to take some time with you. We'll spend this evening sharing information and answering questions regarding the superintendent's recommended FY 2023 operating and capital budgets. Mr. Sheknovich, our Chief Operating Officer, is going to begin with some basic background information. Most of you have been through this workshop and process in the past. Some others are new to it, so we want to make sure he'll cover some background information, make sure you're all operating from the same page as you deliberate the budget. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Sheknovich.
Thank you, and again, Al Sheknovich, Chief Operating Officer for the record.
For the record, Matt Stanley, Director of Financial Operations.
And we are backed up by the awesome team behind us. Neither of which could do our job with them. So, yes, thank you again for the opportunity to present a brief overview of the FY23 operating and capital budget. Certainly, we're going to focus mostly on the operating budget tonight because the capital budget is largely a rollover, but there will be some updates with that regard. So the first slide on your page 3 then is a graphic that really depicts our budget process. It is that 12-step process, and at the moment, we're transitioning between step 7, where the superintendent delivered his recommendations, over to the end of February, where the board will be formulating their request that will ultimately transmit to the county executive. And we'll go over that process and the timeline in a little bit more depth at the conclusion. So diving into the numbers, as we customarily do, we begin really with the revenue, and that's the story of where the money's coming from, and then we'll transition to the expense side, which is where the money is going to go to, should it be afforded to us. So overall, you'll see on that slide there, and each slide, I believe in your hard copies, will have a page number at the bottom right, so this should be 4, just to make sure we're in the right spot. We're asking for about 1.56 overall billion dollar operating budget. That's the superintendent's recommendation for FY23. And as in years past, it is disaggregated between both unrestricted and restricted funds, but it is a little bit different this year. So we'll take a little bit of time to highlight some of those differences. The superintendent indicated, all of you have been through some of these presentations and certainly seen them. But with the advent of the blueprint funding law changes, as well as some of the ESSER COVID-related monies, there are some new wrinkles here that we're going to need to digest together going forward. So we'll take a little bit of time going through that. On the unrestricted side, in the traditional sense, we know that the federal government typically is a very small player in unrestricted funding for public school education, certainly at least as it relates to Anne Arundel County. We're only expecting about a $500,000 increase there. From the state, we are anticipating at the moment about a $28.5 million increase. As we know, the governor will release his budget recommendations actually later this week, and we will probably at some point late into next week be getting some documents from Department of Management and Budget and ultimately MSDE regarding disaggregated numbers from the state. So this is a very educated guess at the moment, but it's uninformed by the governor and it's uninformed by DMB and MSDE. So once we do receive those finalized numbers, we'll go through all that, and as we have done in other years, as we're working through the budget, we'll brief you on those updates, and certainly we'll amend the revenue structure as we near that date. But this is the unrestricted state increase in funding, and again, almost entirely related to blueprint-related recommendations, given that our student enrollment really didn't grow that dramatically, which brings us to the next slide. The county government historically, I'm sorry, Bob, go back one, County government historically has been our largest funder. We know that this is the tale of our life here in Anne Arundel County, right? Because the federal government and state government's funding is inversely proportionate to our relative Maryland's posture against the balance of the country, the other 49. So again, through this inverse funding distribution or redistribution mechanism, we typically do receive very little funding. But again, in this case, the county government will remain our largest funding source. Now, it is important to note, and I'll touch this a little bit later in a second, we are asking for $98.3 million in unrestricted funding from the county. The far right-hand column, 98.3. If you go straight by maintenance of effort, so if you got your pens and papers, this is the time to write, the county government has to give us 1.5. Now, certainly, I believe, we all believe that likely that is not the number we're going to receive in that category. But the county government could legally put 1.5 there instead of 98.3. So at least as a point of information, it's always valuable to have that. Lastly, a very small increase, $240,000 in unrestricted local income from our ability to gain interest income, sell scrap metal, possibly rent our facilities, again, de minimis. On the restricted side, you're going to see a very different, much larger restricted number through a combination of mostly federal and state sources, but also modestly some local sources, about $60.3 million, much of it being blueprint related, some of it being ESSER related. In this current fiscal year, you just adopted a supplemental fund transfer report for the county council to give us appropriation authority for some of the ESSER funding. But some of the ESSER funding we've still not yet received. It's prospective, so we are going to be receiving it. So when it comes time for the FY23 budget adoption, we're going to have to embed that monies into our operating budget and have the county executive and county council acknowledge that we have the appropriation authority to spend that money. So that's where the bulk of that is. A very small funding infusion into the healthcare fund, and that really has to do with the FTEs that we're growing here in the district, and no change in the food services fund. So about $127.5 million in unrestricted money, that is our ask, and about $60.5 million in restricted funds. Again, all to be updated based on what we learn further from the state government in the days to come. Likely the federal picture won't change. If our budget was fully funded, the next graphic on page 5, then the pie chart will show the source of the funds in aggregate. So we would be receiving slightly in excess of 57% of our funding from the county. Again, always our largest funding source. About 28.4% from the state. What actually grows is the federal government. If you put your memory caps on, that's usually sitting around like maybe 3.5%, 3.4%, something like that. So this is really those ESSER funds coming through, but it's really a wave. We know the ESSER funds are going to be expiring, right? So it's kind of temporary. The federal revenue is going to go back to where it was once we get through this little bit of a wave. A very small 4.4% from our local revenue generating abilities and fund balance. And then finally, 2.4% in our food services fund managed by Ms. Rissy. So I did say on the next page, you'll see what our maintenance of effort requirement is, and it says 9. So we grew in accordance with the revised framework for maintenance of effort computation. We had 587.75 students, FTEs, that were recognized for funding. So why does this say 9? And I said 1.5 earlier, I'm sorry. So in terms of our overall MOE, it's 9. But if you go back to that other slide, I'm not going to make you dizzy by flipping back there. Part of the restricted funding that we're getting from the state has a mandated local match to it. The mandated local match is about 7.5. So the county government has to give us 9. 7.5 is mandated, restricted, specifically allocated monies as matches towards blueprint funding. The remaining 1.5 to get us to that 9 then is the unrestricted component. That is a sea change, is one we are all very much going to have to get used to. Gone are the, really days of old where we were getting, all of the money from the county in unrestricted. We'd not previously received any restricted money really of any note from the county. But Blueprint is changing that, and I'll speak to that again a little bit in the future in a moment. As board members, I hope that you don't just look at this today, but I hope you put that in your back pockets and in the back of your minds. This does answer a lot of questions. We often get asked, but why? But why can't we have X or Y or Z or whatever? Part of the answer lies really before you. So in sort of a pictorial or graphic format, this really shows you where we were 10 years ago and where we were, at least in 2020, which is the last data. The state's not yet put out their 2021 data. So this chart, every year you've seen it, has always been basically a year behind because of that reason. But you go back to 2010 and you'll see the average funding per pupil revenue from the state was about $14.3 thousand a student. We, Anne Arundel County, were in 12th place with $13.2 thousand per student. Now fast forward a decade. A decade later, the state funding has grown from 14.3 to 17, largely because of the state, somewhat from the county too. The total share average funding grew to 17.3 million. Did Anne Arundel County grow across those 10 years? Yes. But relative to our peers, relative to the state average, we did not grow as fast in terms of revenue on a per student basis. And you'll see that where we were in 12th place overall a decade ago, we're now in 18th place. So that's really where we've kind of been hovering here recently. And had it not been for about, $20, obviously you can see we would have been, down to 20th or 21st, place pretty quickly. So the next chart is really a tale of two ends, and the story begins on the far left of your page. Those first 4 years from FY 2005 up to 2008 were the years of Thurton. That's when Thurton was really coming on board. Remember, they did a study that our state was not competitive or as proficient in terms of at least our deliverable, our product, our students, either in the workplace or in higher education. And the hypothesis was they were going to invest more, the state was going to invest more in public education. That was going to raise educational attainment across the board and sort of fix some of the issues that were identified. You see then after that a long series of flatlining, right? That was called a great global recession. So that Thornton slope would have actually kept going for a little bit longer had it not been for the flatlining and really the depression of the economy that had long lasting effects. And it's remained relatively flat from the tail end of 2008 through really just this last year. And in 23, you're going to see a big spike up. So good news, bad news. Good news, this looks a little bit like the left end of the tape, right? The Thurton years when educational funding was ramping up. The difference is really twofold. One, if you remember what I said a few minutes ago, back in the Thurton days, it was state money. There was no obligation for a county match. That's one. The second thing is the Thurton money was largely unrestricted. And they largely left each of the 24 LEAs to their own best devices and judgment, professional judgment, in terms of how to implement that locally. Times have changed. Here comes Kerwin and Blueprint, the right end of your spectrum there. Now there is that county match that wasn't there before. So part of that graph is county. But the more important and probably pressing matter is it's no longer unrestricted. A vast majority of it is going to be very directed, very proscriptive, and we're not going to have nearly the discretion. And you've heard that in many other conversations. I'm sure you've heard it in MABE, in many of the other circles you travel. But again, I think as board members, as staff, superintendent clearly is, I've seen him make this presentation before. Our constituencies don't know that, right? So it's our job also to help sort of get that word out. That's the end of that chart. In terms of transitioning a little bit towards where our money goes, we'll be heading this way now. So we are a human capital-based company. This number basically is hovered around the same, but on the order of about 80% of, or 80 cents on the dollar, 80% of all of our money goes into our people. salary, wages, and benefits. Again, exactly what you would expect of a human capital-based company. In terms of that 80%, of that, just under 90% of it is direct facing with students and in classrooms. So 89.3% of the personnel costs are in front of the students. The balance then isn't. If you take a look a little deeper, you'll see 67% is frontline classroom teachers, TAs, substitutes. Another 22.2% is school support in terms of principals, school counselors, psychologists. 9.2% is business support, but that does include our custodians. It includes our bus drivers, our accountants, things like that, and about 1.5% on admin. Beyond that first 80%, the rest of our cost centers, transportation is 4.6, 3.1 for utilities, 2.2 for non-public, and everything else put together is 10.7. So everything else we do, everything else we buy, rent, lease, replace, consume, all of that variable costs, things like training, et cetera, that we have some discretion over is about 10.7%. We've really, and you probably remember from the superintendent's presentation that we've sort of taken a new approach to sort of bucketizing our requests in terms of the strategy. Really, we would have generally talked about, employee compensation. That's kind of always been one of our buckets. And the rest of our buckets have really been enhancements for student achievement and advancement. But we've got this new bucket that is really two, and we'll cover both in details. One is called commitments, and one is called the ESSER funding cliff. We've kind of smushed those together. So our unrestricted operating budget, that $127.5 million ask we talked about earlier, really is divided into those three categories. And again, we'll deep dive into each and every one of these lines as we sort of continue to peel back the onion layer here. But the vast majority of our ask is really going towards compensation, right? So $55.7 million of our request is going into compensation. Again, the commitments in ESSER funding cliff, which we'll go through in detail, is about 28.3. All of the other programmatic student achievement, student enhancement items added together is about 43.5. The restricted funds are exactly what we talked about earlier. And again, we'll go over into some more detail, but I'll not belabor that $60.5 million at this point. So we will go slow on some of these. We'll speed up on some of these. There will be plenty of opportunities at the end to ask questions. I think some of the budget information that you received today probably also helps answer some of these. I've just found it, Madam President, I know that Ms. Howell put pads of paper there, but some of what you might be thinking about asking, we may actually cover a few slides later. So we'll play it by your ear, but sometimes it's effective to just write down your questions and we can just tackle them at the end. Your call.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to go in my view. So.
Okay, so compensation, the biggest ask. So I really want to slow down and make sure that we've got this right because there's a lot of questions, right? So that narrative underneath really talks about that. So to begin with, there's a placeholder that's equivalent to a step increase for all eligible employees. So for example, in some of our negotiated agreements, it says, we are obligated to ask for a step for those eligible in the successive fiscal year, academic year in their terms. Should they successfully complete the current year and have met different metrics. So that's sort of that mandated step increase for all eligible employees. And that is $14.6 million. If you have that one pager before, everything we say tonight really ties back to those other documents. And those documents, by the way, are already up on our website public. At the conclusion of today's presentation, everything you've seen here on the board is also going to go up on the budget compendium on our website. But of that 15.6 million, about 14.6 of it, I'm sorry, is that first sentence. The next is a 4% cost of living increase, and that is for all employees, all. So that will be an across the board COLA increase for all employees. That 4% COLA is just over $30.9 million for that piece. Moving over one comma, there's a placeholder for the FY16 catch-up step for units 2 through 6. Remember that with the conclusion of this just recently approved board and TAC settled labor agreement, negotiated labor agreement. The Unit 1, essentially, the backstep issue, or however we wanted to phrase that, has essentially been resolved. What was remaining then was the FY16 backstep or misstep back in FY16 for the remaining labor units, Unit 2 through Unit 6. And the cost for that is about $2.1 million in total. The next sentence then sort of transitions to a little bit of blueprint. There's a mandated salary enhancement for national board certified teachers, 10,000 in some cases, 17,000 in other cases. We know who the current cohorts are. We've made some assumptions about how many additional MBC candidates there are because we know they're in the pipeline. They're already in process, so we can gauge that pretty well. The NBC salary improvement, blueprint mandated, is about $5 million. And then finally, in this current year, and again, we referenced this just 2 weeks ago when the labor agreements were also settled with Unit 1 TAC, but the county executive and county council's final budget adoption provided only half of the money for a salary improvement that goes into effect either January or February, depending on what pay scale you're on or how many pays per year you're on. But there's only funding for half of the year. I doubt if any of us really want to see those disappear come June 30th at the stroke of midnight, right? So we need the other half of the funding to be able to continue those around for the rest of that fiscal year. And that balance of funding required to do that is about $3 million. So you add all those numbers together, and that's how we get to the 55.6. Commitments. So remember, there's this new bucket was said commitments and funding cliff. So let's focus on a commitment piece of it. The commitment piece of it is to begin with charter schools, about $2.8 million. As you know, there is a state enabling legislation for charter schools. It creates a pretty formulaic and prescriptive funding methodology. The charter schools are allowed to develop their own budgets and operate internal to their own budgets, making their own decisions, but the amount of money that they get in total is largely predicated by state law. And to the extent that it's like a rising tides lifts all boats phenomenon, in that when our budget goes up on a pro rata basis, their budgets go up. So again, this is, a current, I'll call it a placeholder for, charter and contract schools predicated on to the degree that our budget increases year over year. The next commitment speaks to the last and final installment of fully building out Crofton High School. As you know today, it's a 9 through 11 school. We anticipate onboarding the fourth and final full year. We require about 19.1 positions. And then again, some other, accoutrements like additional MOI, because we'll have, another 600 students in the building, et cetera. So all in all, about $1.7 million for the last and final year of Crofton. The next two line items, we got some sort of, I call it prime the pump money. The governor in the current year elected to put some money into his budget, I'm talking FY22, to sort of prime the pump and get some of these blueprint initiatives rolling. So in terms of the early childhood and school readiness, about $860,000. We use those for 13.6 positions for our little ones. And in the terms of special ed, we onboarded about 70.4 positions to begin, ramping up the level of services and amount of services that we are providing to the special ed populations. That kind of one-time governor's money disappears, and it's got to now be replaced with permanent ongoing money. We certainly want each and every one of the early educators and special educators to continue to deliver those services. So we need that $860,000 for the early childhood and school readiness component, and that $4.2 million for the special ed component to have those ongoing. ESSER funding cliff, $18.8 million. So as the superintendent spoke when he delivered his budget address back in December, many of the things that we're doing currently, given the current health environment, current health predicament, we see abating over time. Certainly some even of the, learning loss recovery elements will abate over time. There are some things that we likely envision are going to have ongoing requirements or going to be things that this district either needs or will want to continue into the future. And as the ESSER money is going to be sort of rolling off or expiring in waves, because it was delivered and issued with waves with different expiration points, you're going to see this in not only this budget, but in the next probably two at least, where we're going to be slowly doing this transition of some things fading out, but some things needing to be backfilled with ongoing operating or permanent money. So in this installment, it's about $18.8 million in total. 526 million of it would be for elementary reading literacy initiatives. And Madam President, certainly you know that you and Ms. Antwine championed this, and we used the ESSER funding to get it going. We asked for permanent operating money that was not funded, so that's how we came to use the ESSER money. So if we want that to keep going, then that's something that we're going to need permanent operating money for. In terms of facilities, we have really upgraded our emphasis on HVAC. This is largely on the maintenance arena, so this is not the replacement of wholesale equipment. This is the preventive maintenance, calibration, ongoing tuning and assessments and measurements of our existing installed base to make sure that it is functioning to its highest degree capacity. So about $2.1 million. Almost all of this is contractual service outsourced funding. And lastly, one position in instructional technology for the learning management specialist. And that is really to provide direct teacher support on the new Brightspace platform and make sure that not just the lesson delivery, but the content and the tools that our faculty needs to make full use of that instrument are up to speed, and we're getting the value in return for that investment. So that's one position. All in is $102.7 thousand. ESSER funding cliff continued for more areas. In the current year, we've onboarded additional teaching assistants and long-term subs and the funding for those. We do not see that as something that's abating. We're, as everyone knows, right, and every school district across the country really is struggling mightily to have enough subs and then compensate them sufficiently. This really speaks to the funding to make sure that we can have enough subs, either long-term or temporary teaching assistants. Technology, this is the first of a many year. Given where we were, we had to do outright acquisitions of a lot of devices, be they one-to-one devices for students or Unit 1 teacher faculty laptops, and Chromebooks for the students. So this is really an installment, $4.7 million almost, of transitioning away from that one-time acquisition cost to a leasing model, which is where we are with all of our other instruments, given that technology has a way of sort of fading into uselessness after about 4 years. So we need to get them into that refresh cycle. We stood up a virtual academy, as you know, employed about 60 positions to have a real virtual school with a real state number and a robust curriculum. And if that's something that this school district wants to continue, and ultimately, while it's kind of not official, at least in my head, I sort of view that virtual academy as almost yet another magnet schools, right? For us. We already have our traditional magnet schools. We have our, IB schools. We've got our CAT centers. We got our signature schools. And this is really yet another opportunity, another modality of learning for those students, for those families that believe that this is best for them, right? And I believe it's been wildly received, fully subscribed, and I believe there was a waiting list. So I don't think our public would really want to see that go away. And in order to not see it go away, we would need about $5.1 million to keep that going. And then finally, one position for a teacher specialist in our visual arts office. And part of that has to do with, the visual arts has really sort of grown and expanded over the time. It's become much more popular, but it's also changed too, right? I mean, a lot of it is more technology focused as well. And the curriculum that we used for visual arts of 25 years ago really is not where we need to be today because it's advanced so much further. So that's what that one position would do for us. So going down to that last and final category, that traditional enhancement for student achievement, there's many, as you recall, and we'll slow down and go through the teacher page, because again, this is something I want all of us to be on the same page in terms of both the lexicon and the purpose of these 3 line items. So teachers for class size reduction. Well, let's start there. So as you know, and if you go back to that state funding graph, remember there were many, many years where our enrollments were growing. And in fact, we grew in excess of 10,000 students over the last decade, but the funding that we received in those years wasn't really commensurate. And there were not those years when staffing was onboarded or funded to allow us to keep those class sizes at least at a steady state. And we developed a sort of a backlog. Now, 2 full fiscal years ago, we did receive some positions and some funding. And this past year, as you recall, the current year we're in, we did not receive really funding in this area. So we have a need for about 360 students, rounding a little bit, teachers, to get those class size ratios back to where we want. It's not likely reasonable to ask for all of them in one fell swoop. So the superintendent's recommending that we take a third, and a third. So 122 positions to help chip away at that 360 plus class size teacher ratio deficit that we've accumulated over the past decade. That then is different from the next line item, and the next line item is actually smaller than maybe you're accustomed to. But remember on a slide earlier, mathematically, at least for funding, we only grew a little bit over 300 something students. So when you run that math out with the class size ratios, that's about 17 new positions for $1.3 million. And then, certainly Mr. Silkworth and everyone else knows that it's not just the conventional 3rd grade teacher or the, Algebra 1 teacher. We also need the other supporting teachers for cultural arts or EEE to the extent that, the art classes are going up and music classes are going up and chorus, band and strings and everything else. So as well as the EEE programs. So about 10 new positions for $780,000 for enrollment growth. Continuing then, next couple categories for enhancements for student achievement. Again, permanent subs. We have found tremendous value and utility in having permanent subs again. I won't beat a dead horse in terms of our complexity of bringing on, daily, short-term or long-term subs. And we'll address that in a little bit too in terms of a strategy. But having a permanent sub inside of the building on the bench, already there in the parking lot and ready to go each and every day has proven tremendously valuable. And we're looking to bring 30 positions to bolster not just the permanent subs, but student advocates and some additional teaching assistants for kindergartens. Our goal is really to have, one split between 2 classrooms, but we have schools that we still only have 1 kindergarten TA split between 3 classrooms. So we're trying to right size some of those deficiencies again, as well as onboard some additional permanent subs. That's almost $1.3 million. For early childhood, this is to provide supports with the mandates for pre-K expansion. It's 3 positions. It's a teacher specialist and 2 technicians to support that rollout. We're going to have a multi-year expansion and rollout in this area, and we need to make sure that we can, centrally support that as well as field support it. That's what that line has to do with. And the very next line, pre-K, then is those classroom level expansions. So about 54.5 positions in total to support the additional full day pre-K classrooms sections. So we're going to need to open as a result of the pre-K mandate and blueprint. And again, we will see this for the next couple years as the eligibility criteria, the income thresholds continue to tick downward, which will enable more eligible students. And then we'll have to work, not just us, but the private school, private and nonprofit school partnerships, hopefully will be able to kick in as well. I know, Madam President, you spoke about some of those challenges with our elected officials, but hopefully that will kick in and hopefully abate some of that lift that we'll have to self-perform in the years forward. But at the moment, it's about $3.7 million just for this slug of 54.5 teachers. Recruiting and retaining teachers continues to be a challenge, and it's not all about pay, and we all know that too. So we need to be more creative in terms about recruiting them and growing, being able to grow our own. Partner with the community college has certainly been very successful over the years, and that's something that we want to build upon and be able to be more proficient in bringing our own employees. For example, they may be a TA that has aspirations to be a certificated teacher. So in partnerships with the community college, that's part of it. And then the RSAs, as we have a larger workforce that is younger and facing with more mandates in terms of, i.e., all this new blueprint stuff they have to begin digesting, but also just dealing with, the new complexities and challenges of the students or the differentiated programmatic offerings that we have. They really need those professional mentors, those right sort of advisors that can be there at, side by side with them, mentoring them, doing model lessons for them, showing them, sort of the proverbial tricks of the trade, right? So together, that's 5 positions, $418,000. And then the other piece, then looping back to the subs, the daily and full-time daily or long-term subs. So remember, 2 years ago, we asked for a $10 a day increase, and that was funded. In the year that we're sitting in, the last budget you adopted in terms of request, you asked for another $10 increase. Only 5 of that was funded. So the superintendent is recommending that we go back to the table. We ask for yet again another full $10. So it'll be a full $10 increase for both a daily short-term sub and a $10 a day increase for a long-term sub, but that's $1 million to make that happen. On a percentage basis, going on to the next chart, our students that require English language development services, at least on a percentage basis, does continue to be our fastest growing population segment in terms of required student supports. And the superintendent's recommending 27.3 positions, just under $2 million for both teachers and techs to support, English acquisition and proficiency attainment to, as quickly as possible, get them up to speed with all of their, age and grade peers in all of the content areas. But again, it's a big lift here within a school district because it, again, is such a fast growing section or segment of our student population, and we simply need the human capital to be able to support that. And part and parcel with that is the bilingual facilitators. All of us know how valuable they've become and how valuable we all, and I underscore all, because it's not just, right, it's not just the families in the classroom and day-to-day instructions. We just had the hiring fair at Severna Park. We had 3 bilingual facilitators there. We could have not in any way, shape, or form pulled that evening off if we'd not have 3 bilingual facilitators to help us with that hiring and recruitment project that we did with AAWC. So the superintendent is recommending 3 new positions. It's about $207,000 for those 3 additional bilingual facilitators. I know there was a question about it in the Q&A, so that was answered, but for those clusters still remaining, but the superintendent's recommending that we move forward with one of the clusters in terms of a EEE program, that being the Old Mill cluster. Remember that there are 2 schools that cannot currently, because they're in the midst of a construction project, 2 elementary schools immediately on board the EEE program should it be funded, and then we will come back for those 2 additional schools as soon as the construction projects have completed. And that's been our norm. That's what we've done over time as well. But that would be $1.6 million, 7.5 new positions. And something similar, but a little bit different in instructional technology and online learning specialist. Again, about $102,000, almost $103,000 for a online learning specialist to really support not just the instruction, but this is a little bit more. We've got a big partnership with Anne Arundel Community College, and this is going to become ever more important as the blueprint drives us towards providing more opportunities, especially for our juniors and seniors to begin taking more college classes and take classes concurrently with their daytime school or more traditional school with us. So this one position won't only support our existing faculty in terms of, again, bright space proficiency and other educational or instructional technology, but again, on a much more robust basis, really push where we are heading in terms of partnering with AACC in terms of digital or remote instruction. Their capacities are coming up, our student requirements are coming up, and we need an individual to help make sure that that bridge meets on both sides. On the next page, if you remember in the current budget, we actually asked for 2 CAT teachers. We asked for one for a barbering program and one for an aviation program. The barbering one was funded. The aviation one wasn't. So we're coming back and asking for that one. The next one is really blueprint related, although it's not called that, but it's really a career and tech ed manager. And as you probably recall in the presentation that Dr. Pugh and Mr. Stansky gave you just a few weeks ago, that the requirement for all schools to begin to afford our graduates a formal apprenticeship or internship before they exit the school system is going to grow. And there are target levels by which we have to have our exiting graduating classes reach this. So we really need a manager to pull this together because we're going to be able to self-perform part of this ourselves, but we're also going to have to partner with the community college, partner with other providers to make sure that we have a robust enough platform and the infrastructure in place to make sure that, as it says, 45% or more of our graduating students obtaining either this industry recognized certification or the completion of a recognized youth apprenticeship before they graduate. So that's that one position. Looping back around to the area of facilities, I spoke earlier about $2.1 million of enhanced contractual money to support the HVAC systems. That is for our large, our complex, our very expensive components. But internal to that, we're asking for 6 additional positions for the operations department to bring on 6 additional preventive maintenance mechanics to do more of the classroom equipment. So just to paint a very simple mental picture for you, the big chunky stuff up on a roof, we outsource most of that. It's very complex and ever involving technology wise, but somebody still has to go to each and every one of those rooms and make sure that the motors and the belts and the filters and everything else that's required to have the room end of that complex chain of technology work. So think about these folks are the ones that really are more walking the floors of the building, and we're continuing to trend to outsource the big centralized plant equipment and the rooftop equipment. So this 6 is again on the occupant side of that equation. North County is one of our high school is one of our students that has a lot of turnover. They have a lot of churn in their students. They're continuously registering students. They have students that are exiting North County or disenrolling for other opportunities. And because of that high churn rate or workload rate at North County, we're looking to fund 1 additional registrar for that building to help support that office. So additional 1 registrar at $57.5 million. And the next one's going to be a little weird. You've seen this before, but we'll refresh your memory. So when we are dealing with our budgets, we're not only dealing with a dollar amount on appropriation level, but we also have issues that regard, FTE control, right? Quasi-positional control. So you'll see in a number of areas where we have the funding or the funding source or the means or the mechanism, but we don't have the FTE authorization. So this is the first one. We currently have a 0.6 position At Studio 39, we're looking for the authority to make that 0.6 position a full 1.05 day a week position. For those of you that are familiar or have been through Studio 39, it's not only a very busy place, let's just start there, but it may not have the external activities like high school sports or whatever, but there's a lot of visiting artists. There's a lot of artists in residence. There's a lot of professionals that come through to help work with or guide or mentor or demonstrate for our students. And somebody really needs to be the person that manages all that, not just the scheduling, but every single one of those people we bring in wants to get paid. We still have to make sure that we give them, the right tax documentation for their income stream if they're a sole entrepreneur or a Schedule C or whatever. So we really need somebody there full time, given the level of activity that Studio 39 has elevated to. So we do have the funding for it. We just simply need the authority, the positional authority. A very large ask, about $7 million for special education. It's really divided into these 4 buckets, $6.5 million almost for our birth to 21 programs, 93.6 again, positions. We continue to increase not just the number of students or in a percentage of students, but as I alluded to earlier, the complexities and the increased differentiation of the situations that are needing to be addressed within our schools are increasing. And we need a staffing, again, not just for caseload count, but really sort of the weight of that caseload, because more service hours need to be invested into the youngsters to, again, bring them up to the level of educational attainment that's on par with all of their peers, all of their grade level and age level peers. So that's the Birth to 21 program. A pay increase for our TSAs. They'll work with our special education students from $14 to $15 an hour to be able to, again, attract and retain those valuable employees, $443,000. We have currently vision teachers, and then we outsource to contract vision teachers. It's becoming increasingly difficult to schedule and to obtain the contractual. So what we're unfortunately finding ourselves with is, in some cases, we have the need, we have the money, we can't find a service provider. So we're sort of rethinking this, and we're going to take those same dollars, repackage them. We're not asking for more money, we're just repackaging it and having at least one more full-time AACPS badged vision teacher to provide. So we manage the schedule. We can be directive about where they go and when they go and which children they support. That doesn't do away with the contract services. It just tilts it a little bit heavier towards self-performance. And then finally, adapted PE. We have got students that need to be assessed, evaluated, and a appropriate physical education program crafted, developed for that student, documented within their IEP. And then we have to get to those schools and make sure that the PE teacher at fill in the blank school also is comfortable and proficient in how to deliver that. Potentially, they need some modeling, to make sure their comfort level of stuff. So it's one position, one teacher specialist to be able to do not only the assessment part, but the training part and the delivery angle for the adapted PE. Community-based schools, we know that this is a Kerwin initiative. We know that it's already kicked off. We know we're going to be growing next year, and we're going to continue to grow, because this is another one of those programs, as you recall from Dr. Pugh and Mr. Stansky's program, that again, the triggers are going to tick down over time, and we are going to have many schools, and in many schools, eventually qualifying for the community schools. While not Title I, I really want to use Title I, because we have had a long tradition here. We've got many Title I schools with very robust program. They have a central office infrastructure that allows that to continue to function. There's a lot of logistics and a lot of bureaucracy that comes with Title I. The benefit is, in Title I, we centralize to a large degree by absorbing a lot of that burden, doing a lot of the back office stuff for them, so the schools can do what the schools can do best and not do stuff that they'd rather not be doing, like invoice tracking and processing and, vendor relations and things like that. We do not have that for community schools. That's what we're seeking to stand up. Okay. So we want to make sure that we put our schools in a successful position to be able to do what they do best, deliver instruction and support the communities. And we begin taking on some of that administrative burden. So that's the two positions, but $0 because we'll be able to use grant monies to cover for that. But also the community school model really means that we're going to have individuals inside of each one of those schools then focusing on that instruction. It does not always have to be a fully accredited, certificated MSDE teacher. Much of that under direction of the principal, the teacher, can be delivered by technicians, paraprofessionals. And that's really the model that we're trying to develop. We don't have it, but we think it's a wise use of our resource to bring on 17 technicians to, in concert, I won't say co-teacher, but think about a little bit. The paraprofessional can do the smaller groups, can do the pullouts, can do some of the one-on-one, whether inside of that classroom, as well as maybe handle some of the after hours, think in terms of tutoring, things like that, and allow the certificated MSDE in that room, the teacher of record, to continue to do what her and his function is. So this is a little bit of a shift for us. We think it can push the educational envelope, but at a lower per FTE cost than if we were bringing on those fully certificated Unit 1 positions. All of the blueprint requirements are in fact going to put a lot of strain and burden on this building. It's not popular. Nobody wants to talk about growth in central office. I'm telling you, if we don't, we're going to be in trouble. And these are the areas that we're going to be in trouble. Now, fortunately, we will be allowed to use some of the overhead that comes with the grant funding to fund some of these. So you'll thankfully see zeros next to some of these. But there is a lot of fiscal compliance tracking and reporting. So we'll need an additional fiscal support specialist. In HR, as you know, there's an entire new salary scale, a new credentialing schema that needs to be developed. We're going to have to be able to track when people make these various jumps along the career ladder, or maybe get things like NBC certification, when are they recertified, et cetera. That's a lot of workload on HR. That's what the certification specialist is looking at, really that credentialing piece of that educator. But we also know we're going to have to onboard many teachers. Example number one, right? We have to begin affording teachers more time for planning. We all know that, right? Really, only about 60% of their day, as we all know, and again, we just go back a few weeks to the presentation the board received, is going to be in direct instruction. The other 40% has to be in planning, collaborative planning, or other, Kerwin sanctioned activities. Somebody's still got to educate those teachers. I mean, those youngsters, right? We are going to have more FTEs. We've talked about that. So we're recommending an additional recruiter to help us more effectively on a larger scale, be able to bring those FTEs on board. HRIS, that's really our payroll system. I can't tell you what it really stands for because it's a military secret, but no, it's our payroll system. We are going to have so many of our faculty members really moving so much more frequently with the new career ladder, with the various triggers inside of there. We really need, and while this says it's a specialist, think more really in terms of programmers, somebody that really keeps tabs on that, changes the pay schedules, audits the pay schedules, make sure that when the certification or classifiers say, yes, that person's eligible, that then triggers the correct commensurate salary adjustment. If somebody loses their MBC, we have to turn that off, right, if they didn't get recertified. So there's going to be a lot more transactional mechanics within the HR payroll processing system. And that is the request for that. We do not have the funding for that, but we don't see how successfully we can properly and accurately pay the teaching and Unit 1, Unit 2 administrative workforce of our future without bolstering that office And then finally, much like the financial reporting on the instructional data or the academic data reporting, there's a heavy emphasis, as you know, not just in the blueprint for MSD or traditional source, but there's this new thing called AIB board. And the AIB board is going to be very busy creating a whole lot of new reports and binders and things we're going to have to be uploading for them to peruse. So we are looking for one additional specialist in Mr. Dykstra's office to be able to do the analysis, create the reports, structure the reports, and upload all those reports for blueprint in the long range. Short range, that individual will also be supporting the ESSER reporting requirements. That those will kind of fade out in another 3 to 4 years, but the blueprint requirements are going to be around for at least a dozen years. The next item is something we actually asked for this in the current budget. You probably do remember that. We had the alternative education, the therapeutic elementary ed program. It was not funded. It's critically needed. It's 6.6 positions to support some of our most intensive behavioral students in terms of behavior being a barrier to their instruction. And if we can overcome some of the behavioral aspects, they can focus more on their instructional aspects. And really, so this is an intensive program to support K-5 early learners who have behavioral barriers to that educational attainment. $870,000 towards that initiative. And while I won't call it a social emotional, it really is. And I think, Dr. Lotto really put forth the notion of, we know we've had a deficit in assistant principals. We know that. We know we have many elementary schools that still do not have an AP at all, or maybe they have a 0.5. We have secondary schools that don't even have one per grade level. So there's sort of this mathematical problem. We've talked about that for a long time. But now what we've really found ourselves with is with a lot more behavioral disruptions, a lot more challenges inside of the building. And really we need the teachers to teach. And one way to help the teachers teach is to have the admin support that can go into a classroom or go into a hallway or work with the parent to resolve a challenge in that regard, and maybe to some degree protect that classroom educator to keep doing what his or her job is in terms of delivering direct instruction. 11's not all the mathematically we need, but again, right, there's a little bit of a reasonableness factor. So we think 11 make some inroads in that regard, and we would be back. I'm certain recommending some additional AP requests in the years ahead, but that's over $1.5 million. Now, to what we do traditionally all think of about social emotional learning, we are asking for 2 PPWs, 7 school counselors, 4.4 school psychs, 3 school social workers, and 1 teaching specialist that would really focus on, not just social emotional learning and wellness, but really also help deliver the lessons, be they lessons in advisory, be they direct lessons on specific days, to develop the content and model and teach social emotional wellness through instruction inside of the classroom. We really don't have an individual that's solely focused to that task, and we believe that this 1 specialist would be able to support those schools. Security. We asked for this last year. We did not receive it, so we're really coming back. It just goes without saying that, if we don't have safe schools, we don't have schools, right? It is really that simple. So we got to make sure that we're, in terms of safety, we're not just focusing on the infrastructure. And we've spent tremendously on things like cameras and vestibules and everything else. But, on the human element side, we really need the specialists with that security lens walking through the buildings, taking a look and doing those vulnerability assessments, doing the functional training drills and exercises, putting on lectures for the students. I'm sorry, not just for the students, but for the faculty in different aspects of security, threat awareness, threat identification, and threat mitigation. It's a critically needed position. And again, we asked for it this past year. We weren't funded. We certainly hope to be able to make the case here. The next position, we've got Contractual money, we really have got enough contractual money for 2 people working part-time to help manage the single book textbook adoption. This is as much adoption as redistribution. I'll say it's critical for us. And I'm going to tell you, I believe it's going to be a money saver. If we can accurately inventory our books, make sure we really know what we have. And in my hypothetical example, they'll become very real to you. If high school B needs 30 textbooks, instead of just automatically going out and buying 30 textbooks for high school B, wouldn't it be nice if we knew that high school A had maybe 50 spare ones sitting around, right? So some of this is real-time intelligence. Some of this is transactional, but really it's making sure that we have very good accounting of our textbooks, know where they are, know who's using them, know who has spares, and can orchestrate the logistics of transferring in between schools. We do it now, we believe, with somebody who's doing that on a full-time basis, and that's really their job. We can do it much better and cost avoid. And we're not really asking for money again, we're asking for positional authority. Technology. You've seen the contracts, you know what we've bought, and you know the environment we're in. We've put all of our investments in things and not people. Things don't survive without people. They won't. Technology will not survive without people. The current threat environment, if you look at any paper, I'm sure like you subscribe or you get through MABE or any of the other associations that you get, the threat environment is just off the charts now in terms of hacking and spoofing and cyber attacks and what you read about with jurisdictions, not just within the state, but across the nation. We feel compelled to ask for an additional security administrator on our technology front to make sure that we are protecting all of our infrastructure and software and data security, data privacy. So that's one position in that arena. We have added basically 100,000 devices or more, actually more. We've added more than 100,000 devices into the hands of people and hired exactly 0 people to support them. That's probably not sustainable going forward. So we're asking for 12 new positions. One of it is a specialist. The rest of them are school-based lab techs. These are the people that are out in the school that are a walkie-talkie or a PA call button 1-800 helpline distance away. They will come down to your room, make sure that your software is uploaded and up to date, fix all your technology issues, your printer issues, your networking issues. These are the magicians to keep all the machines going. But we really can't add 100,000 plus machines and have 0 humans to support that in the end. So these are the school-based folks to do that. Similarly, we've become much more reliant on telephones, but also much more diversified. So we really now have telephones, old school, right? We've got cell phones, old school, but we've got voice over internet, VoIP as they call it. And then there's also, which is infrastructure based. And then there are telephonic based telephone systems now that are compatible with our existing computers, laptops as well. So your laptop can now function as a phone as well. We have a lot more telecommunication capacity that we've onboarded and is out there. Again, same story. We've not had a human to keep up with that, and just to keep up with it, keep it viable, functional, and keep up with all the programming and troubleshooting. We feel we need one more telecommunications specialist to be able to do that. The next page deals with transportation. The first one is really just a placeholder. As you recall back to the Prismatic report, they identified the potential need for about 32 buses. They're continuing to work and whittle on that. But as a placeholder, we put in that 32 number. We hope to be able to refine that better for you. But again, that's just a placeholder unassociated with the school start times, right? Remember, they talked about we've got a sort of a mathematical imbalance in terms of buses. So that's a $2.3 million placeholder for contractual buses, 32 of them should that be needed. The next line down is the COLA for bus contractors. So this would be a 10%. It's much more significant than we're giving any of our own bus drivers. But this, for contractual bus drivers and aides, it would be a 10% COLA for them. That's about $3.4 million to be able to do that. Obviously, part of that also eases the transition away from the one-time era money over to a more permanent and sustainable salary structures for the contracted bus drivers. And the vision, honestly, is 10% the ultimate number we need to be at? Likely not. Certainly, there's market conditions out there, but there's also a what's reasonable to ask for, what's defensible to ask for, and what may not put you at jeopardy with some of your own other bargaining units. Driver trainer, we need to up our throughput in order to get more drivers out on the road quicker. We really have I'll just say an older school model of driver training. Now, certainly a lot of the driver training takes place off premises. We are required, even if a contractor does a lot of the driver's training, even if somebody goes to university or to Eastern Shore Community College or Hagerstown Community College or whatever, and does part of it, we still have to do part of it. We're required to do that. We really have a linear class process now where we bring in a cohort, they get through our part of the class, they exit, graduate out, we bring in another. But there's a lag, right? Because we've got other people that are waiting but can't get in until the next class starts. What we're hoping is with the acquisition of this driver trainer, we can basically do, we can sort of have the cycle time and have more classes running concurrently. So there's not as big of a gap between onboarding a new class and exiting out a class of graduates. So $15,500 for one additional driver trainer. And then finally, and we covered this a little bit, I believe, certainly in Dr. Lotto's initial remarks, and the supplemental budget page in your binder will tell you a lot more about this, as will the Q&As that we just put out. But the vans for public school students, again, we fully anticipate, knock on wood, that the state's going to finally adopt those here next week, I believe. That would make it legal and put the framework in place for us to be able to use non-traditional school buses for the transport of non-public students, as well as McKinney-Vento, parents, homeless students. There is a grant opportunity for us to get some of the vans for the McKinney-Vento students, so we want to pursue those opportunities. We were looking to self-procure the non-public school vans, as well as we would have to have all of the drivers and aides that would be funded on our side of the equation. So this is year one of what we hope will be a multi-year scale up of our van fleet in terms of supporting our non-publics and our McKinney-Vento eligible students, thereby deleveraging those larger buses to be able to take on other work here within the county. So that would preclude us, hopefully at a much lower cost, we'll be able to transition these students, deleverage the other buses. We can redeploy those other buses then to other runs here within the district as our enrollment continues to grow, which is will, as our programs continue to expand, which they will. So this, we're really looking forward to this. This is just the first year. Sort of get 1 year under our belt, make sure we got the kinks kind of worked out, and then I'm sure there will be probably a much larger van and driver ask going forward. There is, as you recall, Ms. Ortiz briefed you at the conclusion of this last General Assembly session, there was some new legislation that was approved by both the House and the Senate that provided an establishment of a feminine hygiene product program. It has, within that legislation, it's got triggers by year. So this is the first year. You're going to see additional requests here because the scope and scale of that legislation then will expand over the course of the next 2 years. So this is going to be the first of three asks in this arena. And that concludes the base presentation on the operating budget. We'll take just a few seconds for the capital budget, and then we'll have some concluding remarks, Madam President. And I think we can turn the floor back over, I guess, first to the superintendent and then to you and your colleagues.
Thank you.
Our capital budget request has not changed. So you'll see we're still at that same $193.09 million ask. That really hasn't changed. What really has changed is from when you saw it in September, is the funding has started to roll in. For those of you that have been with us for a number of years, you know that the IEC funding process really occurs over three swoops. So we've only gone through one swoop so far. $16.1 million of it has sort of been approved to date. There's going to be two more bites of that apple. And then the Maryland Stadium Authority funding that came by way of the Built to Learn Act that was recently approved by this past General Assembly. That funding has also not been allocated. They've gone out on the street to sell the MSA bonds. It was a very successful oversubscribed sale. So they have the revenue and now they're going to go about allocating it. So about $16.1 million has already been approved. As you see, there's a little footnote on the bottom that says there's still about another $42 million worth of ask out there that we hope between now and May we'll get the word on. As we continue to get those updates, we'll provide those updates to you. So that is the capital presentation. And really two last pieces. What are, as we look forward, as you look forward, what are some of the issues we continue to struggle with and what are some of the timelines we have to meet? I think, we've had presentations, we've done a lot of reading, we've done a lot of talking, but there's a lot of work left to do. I mean, the full implementation of the blueprint vision is going to stretch out beyond a decade. We are just now really entering the, sort of the first inning or inning and a half of that game. So it's not just keeping up with the mandates, but it's being able to comply with the mandates. We talked about some of the reporting challenges, the data challenges, but probably most importantly, it's really coming up with the people, right? It's going to take people to be able to pull this off with the proficiency that was envisioned to make this hypothesis become a reality. So making sure we keep our eye on the mandates and the requirements to, with fidelity, discharge blueprint is going to be a big issue that we're all going to have to keep an eye on. Compensation increases, can't stress that enough, in order to maintain our competitiveness with the surrounding jurisdictions. We continue and we will likely forever be a net importer state. We can never forget that. We can't forget that the blueprint requirements are going to be yet even more harder and taxing on our faculty members, and we need that capital. We are a human capital-based company, and compensation, while not the only, is certainly one very large tool in our toolkit to be able to attract and retain faculty members. And really all of our employees, because the teachers can't do the job alone too, right? And we all know that. One of the things I'm probably most proud about this district is we are very far from a one-size-fits-all, district, and we have over many years now continued to expand our I call it the palette, right? The palette of educational offerings. And I alluded to virtual school being yet just another one, a newer one to this thing. But our students, our families, our communities demand, but more importantly, deserve to make sure that we have the platforms available to make sure that we have a course of study, a programmatic offering, a pathway for all of those students. It all comes back to what is the right fit for that child? What is the right choice for that family? We want to make sure that we have those conduits available to make sure that that vision can be achieved at that household, at that student level. So making sure that we have the offerings, the programmatic offerings and supports to continue to be able to proficiently and successfully propel those students forward always is an issue we need to keep our eye on. And then finally, those populations that are growing, that are requiring much more investment in terms of time and attention and supports. We already alluded to the English language developments. We already alluded to the special education students. And we already alluded to some of the social emotional challenges. But again, that all takes human capital to pull that off and pull it off well. Shot clock, we can never forget about shot clock. It's already running. Superintendent obviously has, already submitted his recommendations to you. Although, that will be tweaked or refined as we learn some more information. I alluded to that a little bit earlier. We've already held the public works the public hearings in order to gain input from various constituencies. We're holding our workshop tonight. The work that lies ahead really then is by the February 16th, hopefully, with the 17th being a backup date should it not conclude, for this board to adopt the budget. I know that the budget committee, I believe, has already sent out some pretty clear guidance to individual board members about the amendment process. Certainly, Mr. Stancy's group, Mr. Mosier's group, myself and others, Ms. Seaman Crawford, all stand ready to support that. We want to make sure that those are all completely priced out and put in proper and legal form. So please, work with the budget committee to help us help you through that process and hopefully have a successful budget adoption on the 16th. The budget you approve then has to be recast into the format that it eventually goes over to the county government. We have to do that no later than March 1, along with all of the other departments and component units. The county executive has from March 1 to no later than May 1 to deliver his recommendation, again, not just for schools, but for everyone else in terms of the operating and the capital budgets. The county council at the moment, to the best of my knowledge, has not 100% solidified the date. And certainly, boy, oh boy, the last 2 years has taught us that the format is TBD. So whether it's going to be live or Zoom or something like that, that's a little bit TBD. But in May, they will hold 2 county council public hearings. I'm sure you're aware, because we're right in the middle of that schedule, that the county executive, even at this very moment, is partnering with the 7 councilmatic districts and holding town halls. That's sort of his version on input gathering, but the council has been with him on each and every one of those occurrences as well. So they'll continue to get that input through May, but by June 15th, they need to deliberate and strike, that's the word they use, strike a final budget no later than the 15th of June. We'll repackage that and provide you with the scorecard as it exists on the 15th of June to inform you on what was approved, what wasn't approved, obviously advise you of what choices and options you have at that time to the degree that they exist, and then hopefully put this school district on solid footing that we would have a capital and operating budget in place such that we can start off the new FY23 school year on July 1st. And that's it. I'll turn it over to Dr. Arlotto. I'm sure we missed something, and there's some capstone comments as well.
Well, if you missed something, I missed it also. So thank you, Alex. As thorough as always. Madam President, members of the board, glad to take your questions. This is an interesting budget year. This is a budget before you that looks very familiar in some of the asks and some of the conversation. Teachers for enrollment growth, teachers to reduce class size, more assistant principals, EEE. Some of that is all very familiar, and some of it is not. It's a unique year in that we are combining both asks as we roll out the blueprint, as well as ESSER funding, those federal fundings and that funding cliff. So it makes it both a very similar and yet a unique year. So with that, we're glad to take questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sheknovich, Mr. Stansky, and the entire staff. That was a fabulous presentation. Thank you very, very much.
Let's point to where the real work happens.
We know we were seeing the tip of the iceberg of an incredible amount of work, so thank you. And thank you for being out in front of so many of the extraordinary opportunities and challenges that we are looking at with regard to Blueprint, ESSER, and all the other added pieces to the puzzle. So what I would like to do is go in roll call order and just give everybody an opportunity. Please, no more than 2 questions. If there's a need, I'll go back. And tonight, we're actually beginning with Ms. Omasori.
Okay, I don't have that many questions, so this should be very quick. So I was very excited to see the inclusion of funds for menstrual products because I know that our neighbors in Montgomery County, a lot of work was done to get that implemented, and I can't wait to see. Well, I won't be here to see that in Anne Arundel County Public Schools, but I know my friends who are underclassmen will get to reap the benefits. So I saw that in FY23 we'll be starting the first phase. So what does that constitute? Is that all high schools, or is that only a certain number? What is the first phase?
So the first phase, so essentially it's mostly high schools in the first phase with a little bit of work at the middle schools. That's phase one. Phase two is a lot of work at the middle schools with a little bit of work at the elementary schools. The last phase will be the heavy, the rest of the completion at the elementary schools. So the legislation has a timetable. It's very prescriptive. I mean, again, we can provide you that information. Ms. Ortiz, I think, had included it in the summary of your legislative action from last year. I know you weren't with us last April, May when you received that, but I'm sure we can provide that to you too. So they have a timeline and a schedule built into the law, and we're going to follow that as our every jurisdiction here within the state.
Okay, and then my second question, and this is just technical. What are the decimals when it talks about employees? Is that like part-time? Because it's all 0.5, 0.4. What exactly?
So when we, there are positions that exist that are part-time. And so sometimes we'll ask for positions to make that a full-time. So it could be we're asking for a 0.5 to add up. We have a variety of folks that work in different positions that could be more or less than 0.5. And so in certain positions, certain times we'll be asked when we're asking for positions, it's not always exactly a round number as we're looking to add folks on, and we might take a 0.5 that we newly hire and add that to a 0.5 that exists for a full-time position.
I know a lot of the times you'll see that at elementary school, a lot more than at high school where you're at now. But for example, we'll have elementary school A, we'll have an art teacher only 3 times a week. That's 0.6. And then that same art teacher may go to another school twice a week. That's 0.4. So 0.6 plus 0.4 gets you to 1. But as the enrollments rise, as the amount of programmatic offerings we have, 3 days a week or 2 days a week may not be enough. So we need more, cultural arts teachers. So there's many, many examples, as Dr. Arlotto said, where we either have partial positions or we add partial positions together to make a whole.
Okay, thank you. And you already got a standing ovation from everyone at the dais, but I just wanted to personally thank you because reading this and the full binder that constitutes the budget and all the other work that your team has done has just been fantastic. And I'm very excited the things that I see in this recommendation, and I can't wait to see what actually becomes of our budget once we get it finalized. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that. And Ms. Amsori, I mean, we're sort of the technicians that are pulling some of this off. I mean, what you see in this budget is reflective of our superintendent.
Thank you. Mr. Silkworth.
Thank you. I also would like to extend my thanks. This is absolutely a marvelous presentation. I have a few questions, but they're rather quick, I believe. The substitute increase from last year, we asked for 10. We got 10 the year before, but we only got 5 last year. And so we're asking for 10. That kind of makes me think that maybe we should be asking for 15, but I just wanted to be sure about that. The special ed TSA increase, $14 to $15. And I'm not quite sure even that is enough. The comment was we want to attract, and I'm not quite sure that will do that. How much is a $1 increase for the TSAs, I wonder? I mean, you can get that to me some other.
Yeah,
I mean,
Mr. Silkworth, it's about 440,000. Let me get you the exact.
So you said 440,000?
Yeah, 443,000 for a dollar increase.
Yes.
Yeah.
For,
I mean, that's because that's what we're asking for now. So that's
right.
about roughly what it would.
Um,
So you just would double that if you were going to go to $2.
right.
And so
And
forth.
so
But
my questions are
again,
really kind of
anything
along
you're
this line.
thinking about in terms of a question, anything that you're thinking about in terms of pricing out, again, work collaboratively with the budget committee. We'll get you the exact down to the dollar and penny answers. But as Mr. Stansky said, that's for $1. So if you want to make it 50 cents more or $1 more, it's very proportionate generally.
Right. And the contractual bus drivers, 10% COLA. That's not for our bus drivers.
Nope, our bus drivers, we get a 4% COLA.
So it makes me wonder if we'll have bus drivers jumping ship. I mean, it's just a thought.
Likely not,
how did we
because
get to that
we've got
10%?
benefits. We've got some pretty significant benefits
okay.
package that they don't have.
Okay, well, so if you add the benefit package, that more than evens that out.
Yeah, our
Okay.
drivers, so our ASME employees, Mr. Silkworth, in full disclosure, would they be eligible for a 4% COLA? Plus, they would be eligible for a step, and that's about 2.5% almost for an ASME employee.
Right.
And then if they were with us back in 2016, they would get yet another back step because they'll be part of Unit 3. So, it starts getting pretty close if you add up the various components for a board driver or aide versus a contractual driver and aide. But never forget, they don't get retirement. They don't get really all of the robust
Exactly.
benefits package. So it's not always just about the paycheck,
That clears that up.
Yes,
One final thing, and that is, we're asking for 586,000 for Bright Space. For some reason, I kind of thought that would have been more than that. But does that include all of the bells and whistles that come with Bright Space?
Right. So as with every software package, remember, pretty much every one. Year one is the big price tag because that's the installation, the implementation. Once you get past that, you're more into maintenance.
Okay.
In the maintenance zone, so you're doing your upgrades, your patches, your security work. So that's a lot of it. So that's kind of the pattern. So you always, on any big software thing, you always see sort of a big year one thump hit, and then it sort of thins out later in life.
Right. Well, many software packages have different levels, and I was wanting to make sure that we're getting the deluxe. All right, thank you.
Yeah, we're not a small school district, so 37th biggest in the country. We need a lot of bells and whistles to make that magic work.
Thank you, Mr. Silkworth. Ms. Frank?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for Dr. Arlotto, and then I'll move over to the financial questions. My questions are for the virtual academy, and I know we've discussed this before, but how many students are currently enrolled in our virtual academy?
I don't have the figure, it's around 600,
100 something?
552.
552. And approximately, how much could we grow, and what could our capacity be with 60 new full-time employees?
With how much, so we're not, in this current budget, we're not asking for any new employees. We're looking to cover what we currently have. So we've got about 70 employees that are engaged, whether they're teachers or aides or counselors in the virtual academy, a principal, assistant principal. So we're not looking to expand the virtual academy in this next year. And the reason being is we haven't built it into the board's budget yet, right? This is paid for through federal funding. And I have a concern about, my concern with my staff is to grow the program that we haven't yet built into your budget as a regular budgeted item. So we want to build that, and then we're going to look to expand.
Okay, I was confused. I thought we were asking for 60 new positions. So we're not going to take any more than approximately 5. We're not going to ask for any new students to come into this program.
Correct. We're going to keep it the same size.
Okay. And then does this does the Esser Cliff sunset this year, or?
For the monies we use for the virtual academy, did we start with ESSER two?
So the virtual academy is in ESSER 3, so it's funded for this school year and next school
And
year.
next-
Yes.
yeah.
But we wanted to ask for it in this budget to avoid the really tough issue then in fiscal 24 of like either funding it or it's
It
gone.
disappears.
Okay, and I
Yeah.
believe this was not, we passed this in our budget, but this was not funded, correct, last year?
We, not the full virtual academy. We
Okay.
wanted to begin not at this level, but when the ESSER funding came about, we took advantage of that to step it up and get it started. We had asked for something similar, not to the scale we are now. We built this actually very quickly, but the ESSER funding allowed us to build it now. But yes, we did ask for some virtual academy funding
Through
for the
county.
current school year that we did not get.
Correct, okay. Okay, all right, thank you.
But I think the key differentiator is the model that we had before would have allowed for more virtual classes, but it would have still been part of our conventional schools. This is really an MSDE accredited school. It's got its own school number. You are going to this school now. You can graduate from this school. In the former model, we would have had some more virtual teachers, but you would have still been going to Northeast. You would have graduated from Northeast. You know what I mean? So this is a much bigger and different leap forward for us as a school district.
All right, that was all my questions for both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ellis?
Thank you, and yes, thank you, everyone, for your hard work on this. I had two areas I wanted to ask about. It was. Okay. For the mental health supports, basically slide. Two questions. Looking at the addition of school counselors, do we know how many we need to bring our numbers in line with the industry standards?
So that was the basis for, I believe, two of the questions that were asked as part of the board's compendium.
I'm sorry, I didn't get a
Well,
chance this afternoon.
No, I understand. So I would, hopefully that gets you to where you need, but
Okay.
we're happy to, whatever, if that's not what you're looking for, then we'll get you whatever else you want.
Okay.
And the same, there was a lot of information about other social emotional positions in that same package. So
Right.
hopefully it'll give you a sort of a rounded out picture.
Okay, thanks. And looking at the school psychologists, I see focus on supporting the early childhood requirements of blueprint legislation. I know that at least one of our high schools has been asking for an additional psychologist. So do we have no more going to the high school level?
I believe so. And again,
That would
I'm
be
not
in
trying to
the
dodge
bigger
you, but
package.
so
Okay.
there's information there with social workers, school psych, school
Right.
counselors, APs. There were
Okay.
other colleagues that asked for some disaggregated data.
Okay.
It may be what you're looking for, but again, please, if it's not, then just
Oh, I
reach
certainly
out to
will.
us
Thank
again.
you. Yes.
Yep.
And then I know in past years we've had significant ask for teachers for enrollment growth. So we're kind of in a different place now, right?
Yeah, well, last year we asked for zero.
Right,
We
I
had
know,
Negative
I know.
enrollment growth.
I know,
Uh,
I'm going back to,
right.
more recent history, not during.
Oh, very much, because I mean,
Right.
there were years when we grew over 1,000 kids in one single year. We only
Right.
grew 300 and a couple this past year. So it's very low compared to what you're
Right,
accustomed to in the first 4 years of your term, for example.
right.
Yeah.
So, so it somewhat provides us an opportunity to focus on that.
Well, we would- right,
on the
well,
class size
actually-
reduction, which we desperately need.
Yes, and I mean, by not having in general, the focus has always been, you at least need to give us the enrollment growth positions, because at least that breaks even but it doesn't do anything to fix sort of the ills that we've accumulated over the years. So you're very right. I mean, this does potentially give us an opportunity to be able to address those sort of retroactive fixes because the current status is not as dire or pressing.
Right. And then finally in transportation, I'm still stuck on this. So we all understand it's been presented to us. The 32 buses that Prismatic is recommending is based on basically a math equation of a seat for every student eligible to ride the bus. And Prismatic has acknowledged that there's some sort of shortfalls in or deficits in information as far as ridership. And I'm concerned about spending money on 32 buses to make the math work when what is the reality? In other words, again, this is all outside of start times. This was just Prismatic meeting certain standards and again, a basic math equation. So my question is, I mean, going back again prior to COVID, no one wants more than me to have our transportation system improved and running efficiently. And the beginning of every school year is always a real hair-pulling experience. But do we have that many students who wanted to ride a bus and couldn't get on the bus? And if we didn't, then how can we justify needing 32 more buses? I'm still a little lost on that.
I mean, two of your children went to Annapolis, right? Pre-COVID, not today.
Right.
Go back 3 years ago. We had buses rolling into Annapolis with 70 plus kids on it every day, all year, nonstop. So it's not everywhere, but if you take a look at we absolutely have buses. And since that time, the General Assembly basically has been working on the no standing rule and lowering the capacity. So part of this takes into account that not only did we have some overcrowded buses in days of old, but the Maryland state adopted capacity of the buses generally have been lowered by about 20% over what they previously had been. I said this is a placeholder, Ms. Ellis. Prismatic is still actively working.
Yep.
If this was not, hopefully we get a refined number, a better number, but we just needed to simplify things and maybe to simplify your amendment process or whatever, wherever the board's going. We at least wanted a marker on a table, and then it can be fine-tuned up or down or addressed the way the board wishes with more information.
And that's helpful.
Yep.
Again, we've been here, we've heard all the stories, but it's really hard to tell how dire the situation was and is. And those vans won't replace some of that need of the
Yeah.
32 buses, or?
Well, yes, no, it's all chipping away at the same problem.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Corkadell.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. I know every budget is always Herculean, and this one is above and beyond with all of the Kerwin nuances. A couple of my questions are just in follow-up, and that's okay not to have the information. Actually, they're one of those. So I was wondering if we could get the number of the non-teaching positions that are being requested in order to comply with Kerwin, and then the number that we are requesting in this year's budget. I presume that the bulk of them, because they're necessary to set up the processes and reporting requirements, that would be in this budget versus the out years. But if we could get that,
Well,
as rough numbers,
I
or
can
maybe you
certainly
have
give
them?
it. Yeah, I can certainly give it to you for this. I don't have it for the out years.
I mean, like how many? Yeah, this
year's.
year's good. I
Yeah,
mean,
we
we'll
definitely
start
have it
with
this year.
Uh-huh.
So we'll totally give you those as they're reflected inside of this document for sure.
And then my understanding is that the additional state spending as it relates to Kerwin and how much more they're going to be able to provide us to offer the support does not include the non-teaching positions. In other words, the county would be on this ownership of these positions.
So
Or no?
for many, but not all. So some of them they'll pick up, but not to the extent of most traditional grants. I think when President Tobin, Dr. Tobin made their presentation to the elected body here that was with us that morning, you included, that having an overhead, a burden on grants that's more in line with what we've had in the past would certainly help fund some of those non-teaching positions without having to put 100% of that burden on the local county government.
Yeah. So yeah, I think they're good numbers for us to know and understand as we move forward, to help us ensure the stability of the things we need to spend money on truly, not just what is in the Kerwin checklist. And then my second question has to do with, you mentioned with textbooks and assets, and that we're going to be reallocating labor from one thing into another one, correct? To get a better containment of the textbooks.
We've got two part-time
inventory.
positions
Mhm.
currently that we're looking to turn into a full-time position so that person can focus on the task of auditing, inventorying, reconciling, and doing the logistics to transfer books. We've always, see, how do I put this very nicely without offending my high school friends? We have always moved books between schools. But it was a little bit, let's say it's a little bit on the honor system. And like sometimes business manager A would call business manager B and say, look, I got 30 more Calc kids that I didn't know I had. Do you have any Calc 1? And business manager will say, oh, no, I don't think we have any around here, right? But we would know. We actually bought a piece of software that would barcode and scan, and we would have, so no matter what that school said, we said, no. Well, we know you got 17 more. Come cough them up, right? So that's what we're saying is we know we have enough assets, but this really creates a audit and accounting trail that is maybe a little bit more proficient than the honor system we've previously had. And again, I think would do cost avoidance, because to the extent that we already own the book and we can shift them very easily, I mean, within a 24-hour notice, we can get a school from A to B. That's very easy for us to do. And this will allow us to do that and lower the amount of money that we're spending for books, or if a book is lost, damaged, destroyed, something like that. Again, we will very quickly know what's in the inventory. We can very quickly get a new book into that school's hand, into the kid's hand, et cetera. So we just think that this is a wise way of us going forward, and we're not asking for extra money. We're just wanting to spend it better and more effectively than we currently are.
Okay. No, yeah, because I was wondering, my follow-up to that was, do we have a UPC or a barcode?
Yep.
It sounds like we
we've
do.
already- we bought
Because that's the
software
first
system
step
and everything.
in all accountability of inventory. We certainly, great. I have no further questions, but if I do, we have a second round process, correct, with deadlines for any follow-ups with staff, right?
To be sent through the budget committee. Yep,
Yes, okay, great. Thank you.
thank you. Ms. Trondheim?
First, I want to say thank you for all of your work and all of your work. I expressed my gratitude to Dr. Arlotto during our standing call today, but in case you didn't already hear it a few times, thank you to all of you. This has been really remarkable, and I hope you enjoyed answering far fewer questions than me this year. By exponentially fewer.
Yeah.
We still have copies of the last couple of binders. So if you lost the one from 2 or 3 years ago, we could replace that for you.
Yes. So anyway, I do have a couple questions. a couple based on what you've already provided answers to. So I'll just jump in. It was expressed to us a few times actually. I'm not sure during meetings or just in private conversations that the junior ROTC program would become a magnet program this fall. In your answer to my question, it seems like that's been postponed for a year. If we didn't postpone it and we went forward with that, what would be the cost of running that program? I assume the virtual academy sort of took this program's spot in line. And please correct me if I'm wrong. That's my theory.
That's probably the simplest, but quite honestly, think about how many moving parts
Sure.
we got right now with none of us, even as long as I've been doing this, none of us have ever seen a budget like this ever.
Yeah.
And so, yes, very much to your point with the virtual school, but very much to the point of we're already trying to stand up and onboard and so many things in the, probably the most treacherous waters any of us have ever swum in, and to throw yet one brand new stand up to the group that would be charged to do this would be hard. Would they rise to the occasion? Yes. Would it maybe be our best showing ever? Maybe not. So, we are very proud of the programs we stand up. We've never stood up a flop. That's not what we're about. We want robust programs that really become the gold standard for the state, and to do it right.
Right, of course. I worry a little bit about the equity piece of it because those children really want to participate. Some of them, the barrier to accessing that program is transportation, and so I worry about that because I know that that's a loved program at 3 of our high schools, and so I have some concerns around that. So I would love the cost of that. My second question has to do with more of the questions that you were so kind to answer this afternoon, and I'm grateful for that. I think I can speak for all of us. Thank you for getting those answers to us before this evening. It's very much appreciated. In years past, we've known somewhat. I mean, it's under the purview of the superintendent, of course. If we add 3 more counselors, where those get placed is in his wheelhouse, and definitely in his lane. I don't want to tread into that turf, but we've also sort of known through conversations like where people would be put if we had 3. So for example, in years past, for several years, there was a push to get a second counselor at Oak Hill in elementary in my district. And so we knew that if something was going to be funded, that school was sort of next up. So if we can get sort of the list, because I know they exist, of where these folks would ideally be assigned to, knowing that enrollment and whatever could change some things. Having an idea of which schools those are would be very, very helpful, and that's for the counselors, the PPWs, all of the social emotional folks, and I thank you in advance. Lastly, y'all, if you do have extra questions, if we go, I'm not sure if we're doing a round 2 or not, but assuming we don't get to everyone's questions, just send those to me as soon as possible. CC Joanna, I'll get them to you, to Mr. Shegnovich and Mr. Stansky. I'll CC Dr. Alato as we've done. And just know that I just refer you back to your previous email about the next major date in the budget amendment process, which is February 1 for all budget amendments. I think Dr. Alato put on his, probably to respond to what I'm saying. So I don't know if that's true or not.
Dr. Arlato?
Yes, thank you. I just want to reiterate your point, Mrs. Schalheim, that in producing a list, certainly we have ideas about where additional personnel will go. There are no guarantees,
Yeah, of course.
right?
I
I want to make that abundantly clear
Just like in
that that's within the
previous years.
superintendent's purview.
Absolutely.
And I want to based on enrollment and need at each of the schools, that my team and I will make the decisions about where those folks go.
Absolutely. And if I wasn't clear enough, let me be as clear as I can be. I know that that's your purview. I'm not going to tread into that. I don't want to. I just want to have some sort of idea, as I'm sure that you already have some sort of idea. I would just like to know. It would take some of the the guesswork out of it. And I thank you for that in advance. And I'll put that in email if necessary tomorrow, along with any other remaining questions. So get those to me tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just have a couple of additional questions. Again, thank you. The work here was extraordinary and tremendously helpful. Thank you also for all those answers we got earlier today. That was tremendously helpful. I wanted to ask you about the, I think it was slide 28, the school-based tech support, 12 new positions, technology support services. You're asking for 12 positions. Obviously, that's not one person per school. So I just want to understand a little bit how those folks would be deployed in terms of what their coverage would be. And is this the first tranche, so to speak, of a set of asks that will be coming over the next couple of
So
years?
your second half is the easiest question. The answer is absolutely yes.
Okay.
But like in many other things, we can't ask for some,
Right.
well, although we can show the justification,
Yeah.
it's the old laughed out of court adage that we've
Right.
heard many times, right? But going back the other way, yeah, it's a lot of it is, it's based on a combination of how many devices are in a building and how many people, both staff and adults, that they're supporting. So it's really a three-way moving, moving assessment formula. And the difference between a specialist and the tech is the tech is able to handle most,
Right.
but not all. So if you take a look at the job descriptions, the specialist has a little bit higher of a more, more technologically advanced acumen, and when
Right.
the school-based person cannot resolve an issue fully, that's where the specialist swoops in to hopefully take care of the problem.
Mhm.
So we do not have one-to-one.
Right.
We've got most schools are shared.
Right.
It's really the high schools that would have one-to-one, but there's not a single elementary school, I don't think, that has a one-to-one. So
Yeah.
this would sort of help up the ratios and plug a lot of the holes, but it would be a first of multiple year
Multiple.
ask, I would foresee.
Okay. I also wanted to ask, obviously, and I'm very happy to see, for all sorts of reasons, not just Blueprint, there are obviously many special education positions being requested this year. I know we've had difficulty filling special ed positions in the past. I know we've even had difficulty securing the contracted services at times for special ed. So I want to really ask about, I mean, it's great to see so many positions. Do we think we're really offering positions at a level of compensation that will be competitive, quite frankly, that stand a good chance of being filled? Any thoughts on that would be welcome. Just because I know it's a very tough sector to.
There's no question, and you're absolutely right. There's no question it's going to be a struggle to fill the positions. It will be a challenge in many areas to fill positions. The need is so great in special education, as not only the numbers of students in need, but really we're seeing the severity of need that has
Right.
increased
Right.
for our students. So yes, it will absolutely be a challenge to hire this number, and we certainly could use more. As we do in each of the job categories, we think realistically about, for instance, how many counselors, right? And so our folks know how many counselors are at a lot of the local colleges that are finishing up their first or second year in their degrees and their certifications. And so we have an idea about what we think we can realistically hire in a year. And then we're also looking at the budget. Do you ask for everything all at once, or do you take it in tranches, to use your word, over time? So we certainly could use more. We believe we can hire this many, but it will be a struggle. There's no question about it.
I mean, I guess my question, and this obviously gets into other issues around negotiations, which
Right.
is for future. But, you know, it is a question as to whether there's wisdom in hiring fewer and paying at a different level, or looking at structured levels specifically for, I mean, as is noted, some of these are highly specialized special ed positions. And so it's just something that, you know, strikes me as I think about how we're working hard to fill those positions, and the need that is so apparent.
But you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? You answered your own question. And I mean, our Unit 1 negotiated pay scales don't have the differentiation.
Mhm.
I will say, you know, knock on wood, that, I mean, with the advent of Kerwin, right, the push to 60,000 salaries instead of our current 49,
Right.
49, you know, the ability to advance on the pay scale rapidly should you earn an MBC, or
Mhm.
are willing to put yourself out there in the various leadership, you know, roles. I think our luck will hopefully improve going forward, maybe with the Kerwin tailwinds that are back pushing us in that direction. So yes, part of it is, you know, Dr. Lotto and Ms. Rawls, if that's one direction, but remember that you've got some fiscal magic coming behind you that can help you in the future.
Yes, I welcome magic whenever possible. So, unless there are pressing additional questions, so Ms. Schulheim, anyone else? And then we'll follow up with any additional, and Ms. Ellis. Okay, any additional questions after that through Ms. Schulheim? So Ms. Schulheim and then Ms. Ellis.
Okay, just really quick, one more question. The enhancement for student achievement, slide 24, all the HR folks and the financial operations folks to really get the blueprint kicked off properly. I completely understand that. I understand the need for it. Is there any set of circumstances under which any of those positions are more temporary rather than permanent in nature? Like if you're setting up processes, if you're setting up things in the payroll system, for example, would any of those positions then sunset once the clock is wound, or do you not see that as a possibility?
I have never once in my life ever seen either the state or the federal government require less reports. So every time they enact anything, this is both on the data or the finance side. So it's like Heinz 57 sauce, except they're up to like 119 sauce now. They never delete old stuff. So we're always needing to maintain stuff that we've been doing that is of zero value anymore. But for the 17th year in a row, we're still creating that report while they're layering on yet more reports. So we've got the S reports, we have additional MSBE reports, we have additional DL, legislative service, DLS reports. And then we've got this new X-headed monster called the AIB board that I'm sure is just have a bunch of new financial and student data reports. That's on that piece. The HR piece, we're going to drastically, but forever be recruiting more teachers. I am sure that whatever, even the first or second iteration of these career scales and everything is not the last one we're ever going to see. There's probably going to be legislative refinements to those. And really, we're always going to have faculty members, thank goodness, that are going to be trying to, you know, improve their status, their, you know, lot in life and get promoted. So we're always going to have to be validating their certifications, validating their credentialing, making sure they're on the right and appropriate, you know, pay scales, or taking them back off if for some reason they fail to continue that. So, being the adjunct faculty member, I'd love to say yes. In college, I would say, sure, a whole bunch of these are just going to sunset. And if I was writing a fiscal note for a bill that I'd want to see passed, I'd say they're all going to sunset. Having done this for more than 30 years, they're not going to sunset.
Just so I can add too, Michelle Heim, as we create the career ladder for Unit 1, it will be optional for existing Unit 1 employees. So we will be managing our legacy pay scale, because we're assuming not everybody will jump into the career ladder,
Right.
plus we will be managing the career ladder. So we will be managing, I think, for well into the future, multiple pay scales.
Got it.
But 35 years from now, 40 years from now, when they age out of the grandfathered one, we can probably look at sunsetting. Yeah,
Awesome.
potentially.
Awesome. No, I thank you for that. And I just, for the record,
How many years,
um,
Mr.? Never mind.
And just for the record, I really appreciate your sense of humor. Always. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ellis?
So I've been through a few of these budget books now, and we always have this wonderful workshop, and we sort of see where we're going this year compared to last year, and it's all about enhancements. Without reading that book line for line, which, many
You
of us,
didn't?
many of us do, but
Come
my
on
point
now.
is, it would be helpful to further understand the information if we could be presented with a slide, a page, a table on what is being let go. What is, like, as we continue to advance as an education system, what things are we no longer doing? What positions are we no longer needing? What supplies and materials have become obsolete? What are we not spending money on any longer? I think that would be helpful to have that information. And it might be difficult this time around, since I'm just now asking this, but as the budget conversations are happening and as you're determining by department what your ask is going to be, if you're able to highlight and show us where you're cutting, that would be
Yeah.
helpful information.
I mean, I think to your point, going into a budget build year with that marching order sort of allows you to sort of keep track of those in real time or incrementally.
Mhm.
But, sitting here now, looking back over 7
know.
months, and
Yeah.
Right. That's my
I'm
point.
not sure,
Like,
I'm not sure what I had for breakfast
me as
yesterday.
me as a board member combing through that big book would be,
Yeah.
hard to really get that picture.
Yeah.
So I understand what you're saying. I gave you that out. We don't need it detailed or reported in that detail, but it would be helpful information when we are considering the budget
Yeah.
moving forward. Thank you.
I mean, just to follow up what Ms. Ellis is saying, and this obviously is for future year, but for example, across the budget, there are cuts in materials in many, many places, and some better understanding of what in particular that is and what the source of it is, I think would be helpful. Because I'm assuming there's a reason for it, but it just would be helpful to see that as part of it.
And I think even one of your budget questions alluded to it. So remember that sometimes it's not a cut, it's a reallocation. So
Right.
for various reasons,
Right.
it's, it went from special ed X to special ed Y. So
Right.
you'll see the exact number as a plus
Repeated.
and minus. And that's
Right.
just because we've got new accounting guidance or whatever that just says, now go put the widget over here instead of over there.
Yeah.
But it was the same widget. So I fully agree.
Mhm.
It can be a lot to digest for sure.
Yeah. So for future budget work, that would be tremendously helpful. And it might be something the budget committee takes up in a meeting or something. Okay, then. Thank you all. Thank you so much to the staff. Thank you for everyone tuning in. And we will be back here tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. Good night, everyone.